Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks, and today I have for you The Thrill Club by R.L. Stine. This is from my personal library. I will be reading this to you from the page. I haven't read this in a very long time. It's probably been 20 years or so. When I was younger and I read these books, I absolutely did judge the book by its cover. And this book just didn't look fun to me. It looked too busy. There's two girls wearing odd clothes. You have the classic R.L. Stine day-glow green vest on the girl on the right, and this weird bolero blue hat thing going on. And the other girl looks like she's wearing a tablecloth for a vest. And then there's this weird bride thing in the background. I am all about supernatural stories, but for some reason I don't remember this one at all. If there was a ghost or a haunting or something like that, like the book Haunted or The Secret Bedroom or the Cheerleader series, then I would have remembered it, but I don't remember this one at all. This was a request that was made in September of 2021. Thank you very much for your request. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to do this. I kind of let, the wind blow and figure out where I'm going to do my next book, and for some reason, my muse, my serendipity, has not struck until now to say, hey, now it's time to do the Thrill Club. So let's begin. If you want to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I am also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I like seeing what you guys have to say. I like interacting with you. I sometimes put polls up, and I do put posts up that are regular updates to the channel. So stay tuned to see what I'm working on next. I also have a Patreon page, patreon.com/nightfallaudiobooks. Any help will be greatly appreciated. So tell your friends, tell your mom, tell whoever you think would like to listen to me tell them tales from R.L. Stine. Thank you very much for listening, and let's begin. Welcome to a Nightfall Audiobooks production of The Thrill Club by R.L. Stine, a Fear Street novel, Book 24. Chapter 1. Chandel Carter shivered and glanced back quickly over her shoulder. Is it my imagination, she wondered, or is someone following me? It must be my imagination. But why was it so dark, and why weren't there any streetlights on this part of Fear Street? It was bad enough that she had to walk past a cemetery by herself. At least there could have been a little moonlight to keep her company. Her sneakers thudded on the sidewalk as she hurried toward home. She listened again for footsteps behind her, but the only noise was that from her shoes and the shrill howl of a cat somewhere far in the distance. Why am I walking home alone on Fear Street at this time of night? Chandel asked herself. She shook her head, frowning as she quickened her pace. If only she and Nessa hadn't gotten into that stupid argument, Nessa could have given her a ride home, just like any other night. But no, Chandel shook her head, silently scolding herself. Why do I always have to be so stubborn? Why do I always have to be the one who's right? Chandel couldn't even remember what had started the argument. She and Nessa were talking and laughing, as usual, pretending to do their homework. Somehow, the conversation turned to the topic of ghosts. I saw one, Nessa told her casually. Last night, I was walking past the Fear Street Cemetery on my way home from Mara's house. Right, Chandel laughed. A man with a meat cleaver, wearing a hockey mask. I've seen that movie. A dreamy look passed across Nessa Troy's face. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a ponytail behind a pretty delicate face. No, she said softly. It was a woman in a wedding dress. She floated up from the grave and stared at me for a couple of seconds. Then she disappeared. That's all. Chandel was disappointed. That's not much of a ghost story. It's not a story, Nessa insisted. It was real. It happened to me. Nessa turned her attention back to her math homework. She frowned at one of her answers and started to erase it. Chandel felt herself getting angry. Come on, Nessa. You don't expect me to believe that. Nessa glanced up from her notebook. Excuse me? You don't really expect me to believe you saw a ghost, do you? Of course I do. You're my best friend, Chandel. If you don't believe me, who will? Chandel didn't answer. Nessa returned to her notebook. Chandel tried to work out a problem but couldn't concentrate. Somehow the story had gotten under her skin. A ghost in a wedding gown? Why did it bother her so much? She reached out across the table and plucked the pencil out of Nessa's fingers. Admit it, she said. Admit you are making it up. Nessa wouldn't budge. I told you what I saw, Chandel. Now, can I please have my pencil back? Chandel wrapped her fingers tightly around the pencil. She knew she was being childish. Not until you admit you were making that story up. I wasn't, Nessa insisted, so give me back the stupid pencil. Nessa angrily snatched at the pencil, but Chandel was too quick for her. Nessa glared at her across the table. If you don't believe my story, you can just get out of my house. Okay, Chandel shot back, I will. And she had. She gathered up her books, grabbed her jacket, and stormed out the front door, still clutching Nessa's pencil in her hand. She stuffed it into her shoulder bag and started walking. It wasn't a long walk. Her house was on Canyon Road, only 10 minutes away. But why did it have to be so dark? A breeze swirled, making the trees whisper. The air suddenly carried a chill. A heavy blanket of clouds hovered low, covering the moon. As she approached the Fear Street Cemetery with its old tombstones, poking up from the ground like crooked teeth, Chandel spun around. She stared into the blackness behind her. Something moved, a dark shape, ducking behind a tree trunk. Just my imagination? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't want to hang around to find out. Chandel sprinted down the street, clutching her shoulder bag like a football. If only I could run like this at a track meet, she thought, lengthening her stride to cover more ground. I'd probably make the state championships. Almost past the cemetery, she finally stopped to catch her breath. One of her shoelaces was untied. She bent down to tie it. As she stood up, Chandel froze. What was that? She held her breath and listened carefully. A voice, the softest whisper. Chandel. Run, she urged herself. Run! But her legs wouldn't move. They felt planted in the ground. Chandel, the voice whispered again. Playful, teasing. Nessa, she hissed, if you're trying to scare me, I'll never ever forgive you. Chandel turned her head in the direction of the whispers. They seemed to be floating out from the cemetery. All at once, against the purple sky, she saw a dark cloud. Smoke. She stared in horror, watching it rise up from behind a tilted gravestone. No way, she thought. No way I'm standing here watching this. Please, please, don't let it be a ghost. Chandel. The whisper, right behind her, right in her ear. She gasped as something cold touched her neck. Something cold and sharp. The motion was quick and clean. She felt the hot wetness before she felt the pain. She reached up with both hands. My throat, she realized. Someone cut my throat. Her legs felt rubbery, weak. She dropped to her knees. The dark ground rose up to meet her. Oh! A low groan escaped her throat. She felt so warm and so cold, all at the same time. Her shoulder bag burst open as it hit the sidewalk, spilling its contents. My throat. I'm bleeding. Help me! Chandel reached out blindly, groping for anything that might save her. All she found was a pencil. Chapter 2. Talia Blanton finished reading the story and gazed around the room with her blue eyes. She could tell that her friends in the Thrill Club had enjoyed it. The other 5 members of the club were sprawled around Seth Varner's small rec room. They wore dazed, thoughtful expressions. No one spoke. I guess the story is a hit, Talia thought. She winked at Seth. He flashed her a quick smile. Wow. Rudy Phillips spoke first. His brown eyes sparkled with pleasure behind his gold wire-rimmed glasses. That was awesome, Talia. It gave me chills. Really, Mara Drake chimed in. I mean, I could feel the blood oozing down her neck. Rudy let out a high-pitched giggle. He wrapped his hands around Mara's throat. Rudy, give me a break. Mara squirmed out of his grasp. Rudy is too young for these stories, she muttered. She frowned at him. It's past her bedtime, isn't it? I won't sleep tonight. Not after that story, Rudy declared. He turned to Nessa, who was sprawled on the floor on the other side of the room. Hey, Nessa, do you have a pencil I can borrow? Everyone laughed. Nessa grinned at Rudy. Since when did you learn how to work a pencil? Oh, she got you, man, Seth told Rudy, jumping up from the couch and slapping Rudy on the back. Maybe we should change this to a comedy club, Mara muttered. We could all do stand-up routines. Know any good jokes? Rudy asked, glancing around the room. Know any dirty jokes? A pig fell in the mud, Nessa said. That's a dirty joke. Ha ha, Mara said sarcastically. I haven't heard that one since I was 5. Let's talk more about Talia's story, Nessa suggested. Okay, what's the moral of the story? Rudy asked, grinning. Never borrow a pencil from Nessa, Seth chimed in. Everyone laughed. Nessa Troy shook her head. No way. The real moral of the story is never doubt my word, she said, fingering a curl of her dark brown hair. If I say I saw a ghost, Then I saw a ghost. Boo, Mara said, rolling her eyes. Still standing at the front of the rec room, Talia listened as the other 5 club members all began talking at once. Starting the Thrill Club was a great idea, she thought. The 6 friends met every week at a different person's house to swap stories and frighten one another. Talia took pride in being the writer in the group. She liked these moments best of all, when her stories had just ended. Everyone admired her, wondering how she turned out a scary story every week. Everyone but Seth, of course. He knew her guilty secret. He knew that Talia hadn't had time to write lately, so Seth had written the last few stories for her. Shaking that thought from her mind, Talia suddenly noticed that one member of the club was strangely quiet. "Chandel?" she asked. "Is something wrong?" Chandel Carter sat by herself in the far corner of the room, her long legs flung over the arm of the easy chair. Seeing Chandel's tense expression, Talia felt a sudden twinge of remorse. But it wasn't me, she reminded herself. I didn't write the story, Seth did. "What's the matter?" she pressed Chandel. "Didn't you like the story?" Chandel touched her neck, as if checking for blood. She was attractive, tall and slender, with high cheekbones and beautiful hazel eyes that were set off by her dark skin. She always wore her maroon and gray Shadyside High track team jacket. "Like it?" Chandel's eyes widened in disbelief. "I hated it. Why do you have to use real names in your stories?" Talia had asked Seth the same question when he showed her the story earlier in the evening. She had to finish a report for history, so he had offered to write the story for her. Now Talia gave Chandel the same answer Seth had given her. "Because it's scarier that way, don't you think?" "Well, don't use my name anymore," Chandel warned her. "I don't like having my throat cut, even in a dumb story." "Dumb!" Talia cried, feeling as if she had just been stabbed. Chandel stared at her. "You know what I mean," she muttered. "Just don't use my name, okay?" "I think using real names in the story is cool," Mara chimed in. "I mean, it makes it more real. You can picture the person getting her throat slashed." "I don't want to picture it," Chandel insisted, grabbing her throat again. Everyone laughed. Talia gazed at Mara, unable to hide her surprise that Mara had defended her. Mara was a chubby, red-headed girl with wide green eyes and plenty of freckles on her plain, round face. Talia hadn't heard a kind word from Mara, not since Talia had started seeing Seth. She wondered if Mara had finally gotten over Seth. Maybe Mara and I can be friendly again, Talia thought wistfully. Maybe we can stop bickering now. But then she saw Mara smile at Seth. "Maybe I should compliment you in the story too," she said slyly. Seth pretended he didn't know what Mara meant. Talia felt her face heat up. "Hey, what's that supposed to mean?" Mara shrugged and ran her fingers slowly through her short copper-colored hair. Her only good feature, Talia thought cattily. Talia's hair was much prettier, long, blonde, and silky, a perfect complement for her clear blue eyes. She knew how pretty she was, and if Talia ever forgot, there were always lots of boys around to remind her. "Hey, don't act so innocent, Talia," Mara said. "You mean Seth doesn't help you with your stories, the way he helps you with your math?" "No way," Talia protested. "Every word in that story is mine. Every word. Tell her, Seth." Seth sat close to Mara on the red vinyl couch. He was tall and thin, with wavy dark hair and an intense, handsome face. He shifted uncomfortably, crossing his long legs. Whatever," he conceded. Very helpful, Talia thought bitterly. She wondered if he blabbed their secret to Mara. Some guys are like that, always loyal to old girlfriends. Sometimes Talia wondered why she put up with Seth. He seldom talked to her anymore, hardly ever kissed her. Some boyfriend. All he does is my homework. Next week, she vowed, I'm going to write the story myself, if I get a good idea. She smiled at Mara. "Okay, Mara, maybe next story will be about you. Of course, you'll be the victim." "Just make sure it's death by chocolate," Mara joked. Everyone laughed but Chandel, who climbed up from her chair and lazily stretched her long arms over her head. "Talia's on a power trip," she said. "Chandel, what's your problem?" Talia shot back. "Other people have feelings too, you know," Chandel complained. "You should remember that when you write these stories." Talia glanced around the room. Everyone was watching her, waiting for her response. She tried to relieve the tension with a joke. "What else is wrong with me?" she asked. "We can make a list of all my faults, from A to Z." "Who has the time?" Chandel cracked. "I have to be home by 11. Mara burst out laughing. The others were grinning. Talia felt herself getting irritated. She really hated to be laughed at. Chandel pressed her advantage. "Let's see," she said, playfully scratching her chin. "Why don't we start with A? I think annoying begins with A." "Hey, she can spell," Talia replied sarcastically. I can think of one that starts with B, Mara added with a snicker. Talia waited for someone to come to her defense, but no one did. Not even Seth. Some boyfriend, she thought again unhappily. Nessa was still on the floor, her back against the wall. She leaned forward, grinning. Attack of the Thrill Club members, she cried, laughing. From her standing position, Chandel bent over from the waist and placed both palms flat on the floor, as if warming up for a race. Aggravating also starts with an A, she said, straightening up with a grin. Talia took a deep breath and held it. Chandel was always sarcastic. She always acted a little tough, but this time she was going too far. I've got to stop her before I lose it, Talia thought. What can I do? Distractedly, she patted the pocket of her jeans. The solution came to her out of nowhere. The knife. She'd forgotten she had it. This will stop Chandel. Walking slowly, steadily, Talia crossed the room until she was face to face with Chandel. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the switchblade. When the silver blade rang out, Chandel's mouth dropped open. She raised both hands to protect herself. How about an apology? Talia asked, raising the knife menacingly. I think that also starts with an A. Talia didn't wait for Chandel to reply. She raised the knife and plunged it into Chandel's chest, aiming for the heart. Her aim was perfect. Chapter 3. A gasp of horror escaped Chandel's throat. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Her arms shot straight out, then she staggered backward, holding her chest. Behind her, Talia heard the startled cries of her friends. She raised the knife high, showing off the gleaming silver blade, and started to laugh. April Fool! She exclaimed gleefully. Still breathing hard, Chandel gazed down at the front of her sweater. No blood. Hey! She shouted, more startled than angry. Laughing, Talia pressed the knife blade into the palm of her hand. Instead of breaking the skin, the blade disappeared into the knife handle. Whoa, she heard Rudy cry. It's a fake. Talia pushed the knife into her own chest. She pulled it out and held it up. The blade slips into the handle. Cool, Rudy said. He crossed the room, his hand outstretched. Can I see it? Talia handed him the knife. She had bought it that afternoon at a card shop. It was the kind of knife they used on stage and in the movies. She'd had a feeling it would come in handy during that night's meeting. Her friends were chattering and laughing about her little stunt. Chandel still looked dazed. Pleased with her triumph, Talia suddenly felt strange. Stabbing Chandel like that, it seemed so real. A cold chill ran down her back. Would it really be that easy to kill someone? So easy, so fast. What a strange feeling. Talia glanced over at Chandel, who was still standing in the middle of the room, dazed but unhurt. She was holding her hand over the spot where the knife had struck, as if saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Talia hoped she hadn't scared her friend too badly. She reached out to pat Chandel on the arm, but Chandel jumped back. Talia, she snapped, you keep your hands off me, I mean it. What's the matter? Talia teased. This is the Thrill Club, Chandel. Can't you take a joke? A joke? Chandel shook her head. You've got a really weird sense of humor? Chandel, Talia begged, please don't be mad at me. Chandel gave her a stern look, her wide, almond-shaped eyes narrowing with cool anger. You know me, Talia? I don't get mad, I get even. In her usual role as peacemaker, Nessa tried to smooth things over. Come on, guys, it's over. Can't we just forget about it? Staring at Talia, Chandel repeated in the same chilly tone. Like I said, I don't get mad, I get even. The meeting broke up a few minutes later. Chandel and Nessa left together. Talia walked them to the door, hoping Chandel would accept her apology. But Chandel offered Talia only a cold stare and a muttered, later. Her feelings hurt. Talia returned to the rec room to find Mara and Seth sitting close on the couch, talking in whispers. Talia stared at them from the doorway. When Seth had started the Thrill Club a few months earlier, Talia remembered, he and Mara had been dating for a whole year. But he had seemed eager to drop Mara. He kept asking Talia out until she finally agreed. She knew it would ruin her friendship with Mara, but she found herself drawn to Seth in a way she had never been to any other boy. Talia watched them on the couch, Mara laughing, touching Seth lightly on the wrist. Why don't I feel jealous? Talia wondered. Am I already tired of Seth? Only 2 months before, she had really thought she was in love with him. Now she wasn't sure. Seth had changed so much since the death of his father 3 weeks earlier. He seemed so distant sometimes, almost like a stranger. Hey, Rudy's voice startled her. She'd forgotten he was in the room. He moved up beside her so quietly. That was a great story, he told her. Really, it gave me a major case of the creeps. Thanks, Talia replied uncomfortably. Rudy smiled at her. He was shorter than Talia, but surprisingly muscular now that he started working out, and he had nice brown eyes, soft and curious behind his gold-rimmed glasses. Talia had never really noticed them before. Rudy gave her the impression of being strong and gentle at the same time. I think you'll be famous one day, Rudy predicted. Talia Blanton, best-selling horror author. People will line up to be frightened by your books. Really? Talia was flattered. Do you think so? Sure, Rudy nodded. He'd barely finished speaking when Mara rushed across the room and grabbed Rudy by the arm. What are you two talking about? She demanded suspiciously. Nothing, Talia replied instantly. Just talking about my story. Everyone was so stressed out tonight, Mara commented, holding on to Rudy and edging toward the door. I don't get it. Rudy glanced over his shoulder on the way out. See you in school, he called. Not if I see you first, Talia choked. It's old joke night, she heard Mara mutter. They disappeared out the door. Seth was still slouched on the couch, staring glumly at his sneakers. Now it's just the two of us, thought Talia. She sat down next to him and took his hand. She wished there was something she could do to cheer him up. He used to love practical jokes like that fake knife. He and Talia would sit and laugh for hours about the dumbest things. These days he seemed so glum and distracted almost all the time. Are you okay? She asked softly. Yeah, I'm fine, he replied defensively. Talia shrugged. You just seemed so quiet tonight. Seth didn't answer. She hated when he got this way, so distant and distracted, like she didn't exist. She took his hand and wrapped her fingers in his. Everyone loved the story you wrote for me, she murmured. It was great of you to help me out. I don't mind, he said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. I had fun with it. Talia felt a vague sense of guilt. Seth had written the last 3 stories for her. She'd been busy with other things, and he didn't seem to mind. But now she was worried, especially since the other club members were beginning to suspect. She didn't want to lose her place as the writer in the group. You didn't tell Mara you wrote the story, did you? Talia asked, not intending to sound so shrill. Seth pulled his hand away. Hey, no way. Good, she felt relieved. Mara really hates me, I think. Seth interrupted her by leaning close and kissing her softly on the lips. It was a pleasant surprise. She wanted the kiss to last, to remind her of the fun they had had before Seth changed. He's so handsome, she thought. She loved the way his dark curly hair fell across his forehead, the way his whole face lit up when he smiled, back when he used to smile. We used to be so happy. As if he could read her mind, Seth pulled away from her, his eyes focused off in the distance. Seth? Talia waved her hand in front of his face. Are you in there? Is something wrong? He nodded slowly. His voice trembled. I can't help it. I keep thinking about my father. She felt awful, selfish. Of course Seth wasn't himself. His father had died so recently. I'm really sorry, she murmured. There was something I didn't tell you, he said hesitantly. It was as if a shadow of sadness passed across his face. She waited for him to continue. I was the one who found him. He was just sitting at his desk, sitting straight up as if he were alive. This weird tape was playing on his cassette player, very loud. Seth took a deep breath. He let it out slowly, then continued. I saw him sitting there in front of the tape player. I went up to talk to him and he didn't answer. I moved closer. His eyes were open, but he wasn't breathing. That's when I realized he was gone. I called for an ambulance, but it was too late. Have they figured out what he died of? Talia asked softly. Seth shook his head. It's a mystery, Talia. A total mystery. The doctors, the coroner. No one could figure it out. Finally, they just said natural causes. That's so awful. The words sounded awkward, but Talia didn't know what to say. There's more, Seth continued, avoiding her eyes. The bad news doesn't end. What else? Talia asked hesitantly. Mom says we're broke. Dad didn't leave us anything. We may have to move out of this house. Do you believe it? I'm really sorry. Talia stroked his arm, trying to comfort him. Things will get better, she said. They'd better, Seth exclaimed. His expression changed suddenly. He jumped up from the couch. I want to show you something, he said, narrowing his eyes. Something very strange. Talia followed Seth upstairs to his bedroom on the 2nd floor. They walked softly to avoid disturbing Mrs. Varner, who had fallen asleep on the living room couch. According to Seth, she had been unable to sleep in her own room since her husband died. Seth's room was small but neat, barely large enough for his bed, desk, and dresser. He had a poster of a basketball player on one wall. His guitar leaned against the closet door. Talia stared at the framed photograph on his dresser top. It was a snapshot of her and Seth, taken before a school dance. It was a funny photograph. They were both grinning like fools, mugging for the camera. Turning from the dresser, Talia realized that she could see into the bedroom of the house next door. The curtains were open and a light was on. Talia saw someone moving around. Seth pulled a cassette out of his desk drawer. "I'm going to play a tape for you," Seth told her solemnly. "A tape? You mean music?" "No." He concentrated on sliding the cassette into the player. Just then, a face appeared in the window of the house next door. Talia gasped in surprise. She squinted hard, trying to see more clearly. It didn't seem possible. "Seth, look, it's Mara," she whispered in alarm. "Is she spying on us? What's she doing there?" Chapter 4. Talia grabbed Seth's sleeve. "What is Mara doing there, Seth?" she whispered. "She lives there," Seth replied calmly. "Didn't you know we were next-door neighbors?" Talia shook her head. "I knew Mara lived on your block, but I missed the meeting at her house. I definitely didn't know you could see right into her window. That's totally weird." "Actually," he said, "it was really cool when we were going together. We could stay in our rooms and talk all night if we wanted to, but now it's a little strange." Talia stared out the window again. Her eyes met Mara's. Mara waved. Talia didn't wave back. She walked over to the window and pulled down Seth's shade. "Good night, Mara," she thought. Talia felt herself growing impatient. It was getting late, and she and Seth hadn't even touched their math homework yet. She moved away from the window. Seth had loaded the cassette into his boombox. "Seth, I don't have time for music," she said. "We have to—" "It's my father's tape," he interrupted. "This is what he was listening to the night I found him at his desk. Look at this." He handed her the clear plastic case. Talia squinted at the label. There were 2 words on it, written in Dr. Varner's microscopic printing. "Transfer tape." "Transfer tape? What's that supposed to mean?" "You've got to hear it," Seth said solemnly. "It's so weird." Seth had a strange gleam in his eye that made Talia nervous. "You know my dad was an anthropologist at the university, right? Well, he was working with a primitive tribe in New Guinea just before he died." He pressed a button and the tape began to play. Talia heard chanting voices, deep voices and shrill ones, chanting together in a steady, machine-like rhythm. "The voices don't sound human," she whispered. "The sounds all keep repeating over and over." "Shh!" Seth raised a finger to his lips. "Just listen." He closed his eyes and seemed to fall into a dreamy trance. Talia watched his lips move silently. What was he doing? Was he joining in the chant? Seth was starting to worry her. The strange voices grew louder. The rhythm picked up, faster, faster. Talia's head started to pound. She suddenly felt dizzy. "I can't take much more of this," she thought. She covered her ears, but her hands couldn't block out the chanting voices. She tugged on Seth's sleeve, but he didn't open his eyes. His lips were moving silently, in time with the rapid chant. "It's driving me crazy! Shut it off!" she screamed. Seth didn't seem to hear her. "Seth? Seth, please?" Still no response. Frantically, Talia grabbed him by the shoulders with both hands and started to shake him. "Seth? Seth? Can you hear me? Are you okay?" Chapter 5. "Huh?" Seth slowly opened his eyes. Talia let go of his shoulders. "Seth, the music! You didn't hear me, you—" Talia stammered. He gazed at her, his mouth forming an O of surprise. He seemed startled to find Talia in his room. "What is it? What do you want?" "Seth," she said sharply, "turn the tape off, please. It's horrible. I hate it. I really hate it." Talia's head throbbed as she started walking home. That horrible chanting, those ugly voices. It was like a bad dream, she thought. Why did Seth make her listen to it? Why does he listen to it? She glanced at her watch. It was late, and she hated walking alone on Fear Street. Seth usually drove her home, but he wasn't feeling well after he helped her with the math and then listened to that awful tape again. Talia didn't argue. She could see he was sick. It wouldn't kill her to walk home for once. The old trees whispered above her as she walked. The houses were all dark. A pale mist hung over the low half-moon, like a thin curtain holding back the light. The dewy, dark lawns shimmered under the pale, filtered light. Every few steps, Talia stopped and glanced over her shoulder, certain that someone was following her. No one there. The wind made a tall head shudder. Her sneakers scraped the pavement. She began walking faster. "Calm down," she urged herself. "You've walked here 1,000,000 times." But Fear Street was Fear Street. There were so many horrifying stories told about the street. Talia didn't believe them. but just the same, she wished Seth lived on some other street. As she approached the cemetery, she felt a tingling at the back of her neck. She stood completely still and listened, staring straight ahead into the darkness. A single footstep broke the silence behind her. She thought of her story, Seth's story. The image of Chandel lying on the ground, gripping for a pencil, flashed through her mind. The thought tightened her throat, gripped her in fear, and her heart began to race. Talia didn't glance back. She took off running, but her legs felt heavy. She could barely make them move. "What's wrong with me? What's wrong?" she asked herself frantically. The footsteps were louder now, closer. She pumped her arms as hard as she could. "Move!" she commanded herself. "Move!" She could feel icy sweat on her hot forehead. Her lungs ached with every step. Footsteps pounded in her ears. Closer, closer. Her pursuer was gaining on her, close enough to whisper her name. "Talia," said the voice, as soft as the wind. "Do something," she told herself. "I've got to do something." Then she remembered the knife. It wasn't real, but her pursuer wouldn't know. My only chance. As she ran, she jammed her hand into her jeans pocket. She pulled out the trick knife. She flicked open the switchblade. She raised her arm, readying it. "Oh!" she cried out as she stumbled over something, a kid's small tricycle. She pitched forward, hitting the pavement hard. The knife flew out of her hand. She watched it land in a clump of low shrubs near the cemetery fence. Talia lay face down on the sidewalk, panting, terrified. Footsteps thudded onto the pavement, stopped inches from her head. All Talia could do was beg for mercy. "Please," she cried, "please don't hurt me."